I
Hey
can.
Dave, how you doing?
What's going on, brother? Thrilled today. It is Dave Lawrence, and all things considered, Little Feat keyboardist, vocalist, original member, co-founder, Bill Payne. Now, when I met Bill, he was being called Billy by somebody, but we'll see. He's a guy who's played with so many people in the business. It's a bit scary. And Bill, how you doing? Can you hear me? Okay. It's great to have you on, and welcome aboard.
Dave, I can hear you fine, and thanks for the lovely introduction. It was great.
So,
I'm in Montana.
are you really? Oh, wow, that's cool. Well, that's the great part of technology to bring us together like that. It sounds like you're in the next room. Um, and uh,
Whee!
and now I know you come to Hawaii because I was talking to him about that a little bit before for fun. You come here, but in terms of the band, I remember seeing Little Feat. It might have been 2003 in Honolulu, and I remember Paul came with Fred later than that. But in terms of Little Feat, was that the last time the band played here in Honolulu?
Probably so. I've been there with other bands since that time. Leftover Salmon in Colorado. They've I've been there a time or two with them. But yeah, it's Hawaii is not a place that's on the map for uh, the bands I play with at any rate
Yeah.
to visit too often. I've
No.
been going to Hawaii since I was 12, maybe 13 years old. So,
Wow. Well, let's start there for fun because that's a good one for folks. What's your first memory and where did you go? And paint a little picture for us.
well, I had a Dennis the Menace comic book, Dennis in Hawaii, and my dad worked at Point Mugu in California, and so he was involved with looking at installations over there. He was already in Waikiki and Honolulu, but when my mother and my brother and I flew over, it was from Los Angeles. It was on a prop plane. It took 10 hours to get there. Um, and about midway through that flight, Dave, we had to turn around and come back to Los Angeles. And because one or two of the engines had gone out.
Oh,
And
whoa.
I thought, why didn't they go to Honolulu? I mean, we were already halfway there. And I surmised that maybe they didn't have the parts for it over
Oh,
there. So it was a long time ago. Also, George Downing, once we did get to Hawaii, was a, a world champion surfer, and he was one of the original Waikiki Beach Boys who had a setup on Waikiki Beach for surfboards and I don't even know if they had boogie boards back then. But my folks dropped my brother and I off at the beach, and he says, "Folks, you enjoy yourselves. I'll look after the boys."
wow.
Walked away. I mean, that would never happen these days.
Oh, man. What a personal. You just hit it. And I mean, what an experience to have had, right? The touch of aloha that no doubt we still have it, but that way of getting it delivered. I'll look after the boys.
I'll look after the boys. Well, Dave. I'm writing a book called Carnival Ghosts, and so I'm revisiting
Sure. You got the
all
good
that
ones.
stuff. I
Yeah.
mean,
That's the time to
yeah,
do the interviews.
I was writing today about some of my session work, and I'm talking about it's sort of like it's such a blur, it's like a grocery list, right? From all the dates I played.
No, it is.
Started off with BB King and Barbara Streisand,
Those were your
telling a
first.
couple stories about.
You were in, and those were. Was that a chronological thing, the BB King and Barbara Streisand, or you just came up with those today to start writing about?
I'm going to have to stay away from the chronological order of things when it comes to my sessions
I
because
get it.
uh, I it's just there's too many of them. I do show a portion of my day at a glance. Well, I didn't want any day at a glance. It was just a notebook where I had sessions with there's two Bonnies, Bonnie Raitt and Bonnie Bramlett. John Cale was on the list from was his album 1939, I think. And then John Sebastian, I was working with John, a couple of other people, and so these were the things I had listed out in a chronological order, and by each one's names and the dates where the sessions took place, the words paid appeared. So I was keeping my books like who paid and who didn't, and
I
all
love
those.
it.
It's a It's been quite the journey, I'll tell you.
No, it is. I mean, in fact, that's a great. Again, it's Bill Payne, and when I met you, you were called Billy Payne. But anyway, Little Feat have a brand new record, Sam's Place, and we'll feature some of that later in our chat. But in any event, when you're talking about all these different connects and this guy, I mean, and I'll read some of them later. It is like you said, a shopping list of artists, and we'll try to prompt him with specific stories. But the first time I got to meet this cat, we were at this place called. It was Great Woods, and they had turned it into the Tweeter Center. That was its name, but it was in suburban Boston, and I got the station where I got to get my start as a producer for an afternoon rock radio legend, the late great Mark Perreno, and he and I had gone to see Bob Seger, and we were standing on the side of the stage and got to run into you, and he introduced me to you. And before we met you, he was like, "You got to meet Billy Payne. He's the nicest guy. This guy is such a good guy and such a killer keyboardist," rah, 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 with his distinctive voice.
Was that tour? Was that the tour in 1986 or
It
96?
was '96.
Very good.
But it was just a fun memory for me because it just shows, there you were back in 1996, I guess it was, yeah, with Bob Seger, and he was like, yeah, that's Little Feat's keyboardist up there working with Bob Seger, and you did a ton of Bob Seger records, right?
I did. My first track with Bob was Against the Wind, and I played Hammond B3 on that.
Whoa.
I played on Hollywood Nights. Uh, um, let's see, Like a Rock. There's a song of Rodney Crowell's that did Shame on the Moon. I played on a lot of stuff with Bob Seger and did 2 tours with him.
What is the most when now that we think about Bob, any fun story or maybe the first time you met him, maybe how you got the gig or maybe a moment on the road that was very personal where you got to spend some one-on-one time with him that you think back and you think, "Man, I'm really grateful that I got to spend that time with Bob or have that one chat."
Well, a couple of things. One was that just being on stage with him, and I've had the pleasure and honor for many, many years of working with some of the best singers in the world. And to watch Bob work on stage, I mean, he just has such a command
Mm,
of not only the audience, but his vocals are just they grab you by the throat, right?
mm,
Um, he's a keyboard player himself,
right.
but he plays more of the kind of keyboard like James Taylor would, the songwriting keyboard. So they've got the chords and they know that, but that's why they hire people like me or Craig Frost
Exactly.
to come in and embellish it. But we played golf one time, and I didn't know he was a golfer, but it was nice to see Bob out on the golf course, just relaxed, and except when he was hitting poor shots like the rest of us. And that kind of thing. Golf has a way of bringing people to their knees uh, and making them human. And he's actually a very, very great guy. It's been quite a few years since I've worked with him, but I enjoyed immensely being able to tour with him and play on his albums.
Oh, it was giant. It was giant to see you up there, and you were hammering it, and I was stoked because the cat I was with was a big time radio DJ in the Boston area, Mark Perreno, and Bob Seger had known him from Detroit, and even came he as you were playing some keyboard solo in one of those tunes, he recognized Mark. And you saw the look of recognition on his face, and because there was time for it, he came right over to the side and said hi to us during the jam, because you guys are out there playing. So it was very, I will never
Yeah, that's
forget.
cool.
Yeah, you don't forget stuff like that. And when I look at,
No,
when I think about the record and some of the way you, this is their, not just the Sam's Place new one from Little Feat, it's their first studio album in 12 years. So that's obviously a significant thing, although now records are a different kind of commodity altogether. But it's called their first ever blues album. First song release, Little Feat's cover of a Willie Dixon tune that Howlin' Wolf had a hit with, You'll Be Mine. And now, when I think about over your long life and all these cats you've worked with, I started to think of the new record, Sam's Place, and thinking like, okay, Willie Dixon, Howlin' Wolf. Did you ever get to see them when you were young, or have the opportunity to play with either of those guys?
well, let's start with Howlin' Wolf. I never got to play with him. But I was just writing about this afternoon. I was in a session with BB King on one of his records. I think it's called Deuces Wild. And BB recorded one of Willie Nelson's tunes, The Nightlife, and Willie was there playing as well.
Wow.
But we were sharing stories, BB and I, after the session. Little Feat had done a tour with him. And I talked about Lowell George presenting a guitar as Howlin' Wolf was walking into the back of the Ash Grove, which was a blues club in Los Angeles. This would have been in the late 60s, maybe as early as 66. I met Lowell in 69. But he held up his guitar to Wolf. Hey, Wolf, play my guitar. And Wolf looked back and said, F off, kid. And BB goes, Howlin' Wolf would have never said that. And I said, BB, I hear you, but I believe Lowell. So we kind of left it at that. But Willie Dixon and I, we did meet, and I played music with him at Madison Square Garden in New York, obviously. And it was a party and let's see, for John Lee Hooker. About 2 months later, I played on John Lee's album as well. But we were there, Paul Pereira, myself, Richie Hayward, George Porter from the Meters,
Oh,
playing with Willie Dixon, Johnny Winter,
oh,
Greg Allman,
oh
and
boy.
Joe Cocker.
Oh man. Whoa. All on the
So
stage together?
they came out at separate times, and
You backed them
but
all.
we were the band backing those guys. And I saw John Lee come in that night with a couple of babes, one babe on each arm.
What year
and
is this
and
again, Bill? We have to get the year.
I'm not sure what it was. It was in the 2000s, right?
Okay.
Maybe I
Okay.
don't know, 2003, 2005. I'm just not sure. Uh, that's part of the research I'll do when I look these things up.
Wow.
Um, yeah, playing with Willie Dixon. Yeah. Oh, here's one for you. When we were rehearsing the day before the show, it was a very tiny room, and Richie Hayward's playing drums as softly as he can, and Willie Dixon, who's this tall, this big man. He's got a pork pie hat on. He's got a three-piece suit with a handkerchief in his left collar or lapel, and he says, uh, he's wiping his face. He says, "I can't stand this when it's too loud. Stop! You got to make it softer, softer." And Richie's looking at him like, "Oh my gosh, what do I do?" So he was playing the drums as quietly as I've ever heard any human being on earth ever do it. And we knew about Willie Dixon from Hubert Sumlin, who used to tell us that Willie Dixon was a boxer back in the day. And in the old days, he'd pull you out into the alley and thrash you if you didn't if you didn't pay attention. We didn't think he would do that to us, but we were very respectful and mindful that he had a history. So we were minding our P's and Q's, as they say.
That is and Richie Hayward, for people who didn't know, the late drummer from Little Feat, and
Yeah.
what those are the kind of stories. And another guy, equal kind of cat, or well, you know more than me. I'm just a kid compared to you. But the second song released from Little Feat's new all blue first ever blues record and first studio record in 12 years actually is another one of these big legends. Muddy Waters, Can't Be Satisfied is the jam. Now, Muddy was still obviously busy at times. Any cool Muddy stories that you have, firsthand accounts?
Well, I don't have any first-hand accounts. I saw him play, of course,
Well, there you go.
and
That's pretty cool.
most of the places and I'm pretty sure I saw him in San Francisco, and it was probably at the same place I saw Howlin' Wolf, which was at the Fillmore Auditorium.
Nice.
Bill Graham used to be the greatest acts um, into that place, and it's funny because the first time I visited Lowell George to go to his house in Los Angeles, uh, I went up, I drove over, I mean, I went to his house, and there was a beautiful blonde girl in his living room. Door was open. It was summertime, and she was listening to Eric Satie, some classical music. And she goes, "Oh, you must be Bill. Lowell's expecting you. He'll be back in 4 hours." And I looked at her and said, "Well, what does he do when he's not expecting you?" So I walked into his house. We chatted. She and I chatted for briefly for a while, and she left. And I'm looking at his place, and I'm looking at this, the samurai sword on the back wall. There's a sitar that I found out later that he'd been taking lessons from Ravi Shankar
Wow.
um, in L.A. And then I started perusing his record collection. He had several Muddy Waters albums, Alan Wolf records, uh, a comedy record that Frank Zappa had put out on Lenny Bruce, and a couple of albums, I believe, by the Smithsonian Institute. And there was one track, "Hey Lordy, join the band, Big Bull Rat gonna join the band," which was on Waiting for Columbus.
Yeah.
And that was one of those Chain Gang songs that we had, borrowed,
Adapted,
lifted,
right?
however you want to put it. Yeah. So, but I'm pretty sure I saw and heard Muddy Waters up in the San Francisco area. And, they always, Dave, they always had the greatest bands. It just was, I used to think about, I told George Massenberg, who's our engineer, years later on a couple of records we were working on. And we got everybody's mic'd up. You got 6 mics on the drums, uh, direct lines into things. It's kind of like what you do in the studio when you're recording.
Sure.
And I said, "Well, George, what would we have done if we were working with Howlin' Wolf, Chester Burnett, uh, Little Walter, any of those guys? You set up a couple of mics in a room, just let people play, right?"
Right.
And and so I'm gonna segue from that thought into Sam's place, because we recorded that in Memphis, Tennessee, at um,
Historic
Sam
place.
Sam Phillips, one of his studios. It wasn't Sun Studios, but it was another one. And his son Jerry worked there, by the way. Um, but we walked in the room and we started to play, and we we had headphones, but we really couldn't hear very much. And the we had our own engineer, a guy named Charles A. Martinez, who worked with Donald Fagen and with Steely Dan, those guys. So his credentials were through the roof.
Hmm.
We loved the guy. And but we were going, "Charlie, we can't really hear what's going on." Well, Bomar was the guy that was the main engineer in the studio. He wasn't engineering us, but he was there to oversee, to make sure we had what we needed. And he says, "Boys, that's the way we do it down here." And we're like, "Well, okay, that's fine that you do it that way, but we would like to do it a slightly different way." So we, we were polite, we're in the South. Well, 8 people were shot in front of the hotel the night before we came in.
Oh man.
Uh, we're in Memphis, Tennessee. I mean, it's like, come on. So, but once we could hear, and I think this album exemplifies it. There's this energy and people. I mean, I was talking to Tony Leone, who's our drummer, about this yesterday, and Tony said, this was our love letter to the blues.
Mm.
So for people that love the blues and might think, "Oh gosh, here's another band going out to play the blues, taking the easy way out," as somebody told me yesterday, until they heard what we've done. Um, we don't take it lightly. We went in there, we had fun. I was playing Jerry Lee Lewis's piano, purportedly.
How
I
cool
kind
is
of viewed
that?
it as George Washington slept here, but here I have no reason to think that people were lying to me about it. And not unlike the piano I played at Johnny Lee Shell's house 12 years ago, when we did, what was it, Rooster Rag, I'd said about Richard Manuel's piano from the band with Robbie Robertson and all those guys, Levon Helm, etc., Garth Brooks, that the piano played itself. And that's really the way I felt.
Places like that can obviously bring out an incredible sound, and sometimes bring the right kind of energy or vibe for musicians. But also, when I think of like playing the piano, and drawing a little bit of a context for folks who may be surprised by this, because you think about the different. It's on this record as Bonnie Raitt, for example. So it's like he's got, and you guys are covering actually another Muddy Waters classic, Long Distance Call. But when you look at the big scope of the names that you're associated with, I didn't actually see this guy among the sessions, but I thought it was an interesting story that Elton John is listed in your Wikipedia page as a huge fan of yours. Is there a time of that you learned he was a fan of yours, or a relationship with him that you can explain that would be kind of interesting for folks?
Well, it's interesting that you brought it up because Bonnie Raitt was the person that called me one evening when I lived in Los Angeles. She goes, Bill or Billy, you know, Elton John is a fan of yours. I go, really? Oh, well, Elton John was a big fan. He'd like to meet you, and he's playing at Universal City. Would you care to drive down there and meet him? And so I said, well, yeah, sure, okay. And so I drove down there, and Dave, there were so many people that were crowded around the place, and you know, trying to get in and this and that. I I walked up to where my name may or may not have been on the backstage list, and I just said, I really don't want to do this. So I drove home. Years later, I saw Davy Johnstone, who plays
In the
guitar
band.
with Elton,
Yeah.
uh, in the band, and we were down in Sydney, Australia, and the Siebel Townhouse was the hotel I I bumped into to Davey at, and he says, "Oh, Elton's here. He would love to say hello to you." And we were downstairs and we're talking for a while, and I said, gosh, Davey, if he's available, let's do it. And if not, let's just please tell him thank you. I'm a fan of his too. I mean, we heard his first album when it came out. I thought he was brilliant. I've since worked with who's the guy that wrote all the songs with him?
Bernie
Yeah,
Taupin.
Bernie Taupin. I played on one of Bernie's records, actually two of his records. He was in a group called Straw Dogs, and so please let Elton know. I thank him for the praise, and I aim it right back at him. And I never to this day met him. So
Wow. So that is a fascinating story. So you got to, and I know what you mean, the chaos outside of like a superstar. It's so much. You just don't want to have to deal with, hi, I'm so and try to navigate. I know this, I've been at like backstage at Ozfest trying to get close to Ozzy and going, I don't know, I want to go into that world. But I know when you but when I think of the Elton, two times you drive all the way there, you see all that, you can't do it. Then you're with Davey and sitting there, and so you just decided not to meet him. Wow, I got to hand it to you, because that's very revealing of the intensity of some of that stuff, and how much of a turnoff it really can be. Before I wrap it up with you, because you've been very generous, and I could talk to you all day, but I'm unable to on my end, unfortunately. But there's another person that I'm wondering if you have any cool story about this. I've seen Little Feat a few times, been very, very fortunate and lucky to see you in a few different places. But the one I remember the most, I believe the month was June. I know it was 1991. And my mom, who is no longer with me, I had my mother, who's a big rock fan. She turned me on to Led Zeppelin, Santana, and T-Rex, and so many different groups. But we went to see, my mom, my dad, and my girlfriend at the time, and some others. We got to go see the Grateful Dead headlining at Giant Stadium, and the Great Little Feat was opening the show for 2 nights at Giant Stadium. Can you even remember those, my brother?
I can indeed, and one of them we went on in the afternoon, I believe, and I'm not sure if you remember that, but for some commercial that Spike Lee had recorded, and the two things I remember about the show was, one was Jerry Garcia was sitting on a road case just off stage listening to us when we played. And we knew Jerry, but how cool was that to have Jerry Garcia
Unbelievable.
listening to you when you're
Amazing.
playing?
Amazing.
Uh, but the commercial I'm talking about, they showed it on TV, and they're at the very top of the stadium, Dave. And this person's just like he's got his right hand wanging out over the top of his head, rocking out to this music. And I went, that guy's rocking out to our music because the Grateful Dead didn't go on until that evening. So that was a heck of a thing to put together in my own head and compartmentalize, and it was cool.
Right, a
But
Spike Lee commercial. You're saying filmed there, but it was from the time of when it was filmed. It was filmed while you were playing.
it had to be because it was in the afternoon. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, yeah. You went on some point earlier, but that just shows the kind of life this cat has. And I'm just going to read a quick sample of his grocery list just to give you the kind of thing, because you'll find this guy's name. It could be Bonnie Raitt, Jackson Brown, J.J. Cale, Robert Palmer, Carly Simon, Neil Diamond, Jimmy Buffett, Barbara Streisand, Rod Stewart, Bob Seger, Greg Allman, B.B. King, Stevie Nicks, Doobie Brothers, James Taylor. So many different things on this guy's list. James is coming here.
We're not as tight as we used to be. I'll put it that way. But we still we saw each other. Oh gosh, a year ago, and I said, James, this is in Montana, and James is a year to the day older than I am by
Oh,
a year.
wow.
So we're both March 12th. He was born 48. I was born in 49. I said, James, I always view you as the canary in the coal mine. As long as you're doing well, I think I'm doing okay.
That's a good way of looking at it. Well, and that's a great lead in, wow, to our final question. And it's based on the song that I'm going to go out with. Man, I hope I picked a good one here. And you tell me if I'm wrong and this is not a good one to have picked. But this is one I believe that you wrote or co-wrote. Time Loves a Hero. When I hear that song, it takes me right back to being a little kid. Any cool story for that?
Well, I tell you that I was Fran Tate, who was, I can't remember if Fran co-wrote that with me or not. It might have been her and Paul Barrera, and certainly Kenny Gradney, who played the bass line in it. Dum, ba, dum, ba, da, dum,
Yeah.
doo, doo, bum, bum. Fran and I were down in the Virgin Islands, and when we're coming back, we stopped off in Puerto Rico, and we went into one of the casinos just to sort of in between flights to look around. And at that juncture, I was starting to make up a story about an uncle that I had, which I didn't. But I mean, if I did, he would be from Puerto Rico. He would have left the States many years ago. That kind of. So I was creating this story about the song itself. But I can also tell you that the title, "Time Loves a Hero," I've introduced the new band with Scott Sherrard, with Tony Leone, the older group with Fred Tackett, Sam Clayton, Kenny Gradney, both from Delaney and Bonnie, by the way. And I say, look, we honor Lowell and Paul and Richie every time we get up here. They
Hmm.
are a part of our family. They always will be, and we honor those of you that have stuck with us all these years, and we're still doing it. We're still having fun doing it, and we're still challenged by what we do. Um, but yeah, we're part of this larger circle that was also what that song was about.
Yeah, well, that's a huge way of putting it. And what's that other one about the hookers and the bar with all the everybody on the blow? Oh, Spanish Moon. That's
Spanish
the one.
Moon.
That's the one I really and that
Yeah,
was a Lowell. That's a Lowell jam, right? Spanish Moon.
yeah, it's a lull tune, a really good one. Van Dyke Parks had helped him with it. I don't know about writing, but he certainly helped him on the production. Gordon DeWitty, a blind keyboard player, black, who had known him, I believe, clavinet on that keys on that song. I came in later, played some B3 and other stuff, and yeah, really good. There's just, which is why I'm writing this book. It's Carnival Ghost. There are so many stories. Um,
Right.
the only thing I promised myself is I don't want to denigrate people. I want to, we were all part of something in the 70s. It was chaotic. Uh, Men that's what I call it, murder, lust, men on the moon, right?
No
Uh,
question.
we just had it all going on at
You
the same
you
time.
you did, and I mean that's a great way of looking at like, cause like Waiting for Columbus, isn't that Tower of Power jamming the horns on that thing for you guys?
Yeah, Tower Power's in there. We on this on Sam's Place we have Mark Edmonston. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and Mark Franklin. And I met those guys with the Doobie Brothers. Or Scott Sherrard, excuse me, knew those two fellows when he was working with Greg Allman, and I was on a tour with the Doobie Brothers where I met Scott and had discussions with Greg and uh, Greg Allman about a few things. He was a huge Little Feat fan as well, but I got to say, I was a huge fan, and still am, of the Allman Brothers. And God rest Dickie Betts' soul, is all I can say. It's when he first came on our bus to leave you a lasting image of Dickie.
Please do.
Uh, People normally knock on the door before they get on our bus, and this fella just opened the door and he threw his hat in. And he came in about 5, 10 seconds later. He says, "I just wanted to see if anybody was going to shoot at it." That's Dickie Betts.
He was the only almond I never got to meet of all those classic, like the modern era guys. You never, you were
Yeah,
tight with?
I just said hey to him. I didn't really know him,
Okay,
but Greg and I had a substantial conversation about himself and Little Feat and Dwayne, his brother, God rest his soul, and with Lowell, and yeah, just some great stuff. I mean, it's a musical community that when I was in a basement in uh, Eden Hall in Amsterdam, just outside of Amsterdam, I was talking with Keith Richards, and the Rolling Stones had come to hear us on Moss play a concert there. And I'm going, "Oh, Keith, Keith, oh my gosh." And he grabbed me and he pulled me in and he says, "Oh, mate, we're all part of the same cloth." In other
wow,
words, welcome to the club, Bill.
nice,
And I never forgot it. And I've always extended that kind of greeting to musicians I've met over the years, that whether they play in a garage band or a local group or that they play worldwide, it doesn't matter. We're part of that club, and we're like Groucho Marx. Most of us are people that would never join a club if they would accept us as a member, but in fact, we are part of something that's a lot bigger than any of us, and the roster is so vast and jaw dropping. You go all the way from Brahms, Beethoven to Little Richard to,
right,
William Gould, Nino de la Rota. I mean, it's just it's called musicians.
yep.
And that's what Little Feat is about. It's about great musicianship married to great songs.
The way that you talk, Billy Payne, is exactly like my late great boss Mark Bruno when he said, "You're gonna love this guy. He's the nicest guy in the business. He's such a nice guy, and he's a great player." And we've been blessed today. Little Feat keyboardist, vocalist, original member, co-founder, Billy Payne, and he's played with so many people. And the new album is Sam's Place, out May 17th. It's out now, and first studio album in 12 years, first ever blues album, and features our one-time guest Bonnie Raitt as a special guest on there, and just some great tunes. Billy, I really hope that you had fun today. Now, be honest with me. Was this an okay interview? Should I have asked some other stuff? Were you remotely entertained?
I was more than entertained. I was honored to talk to you. And are you in Honolulu?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, I give you a fond aloha and certainly a heartfelt mahalo as well.
You're the king bee. If you're ever going to be back in this island for a trip, reach out through your people or whatever, and I'd love to have you come by
Okay.
the studio or whatever, do a thing in person. But sending you lots of aloha and hope you feel super appreciated because I'm real grateful for your time, man. I've been a big fan since I was a little boy, 6, 7 years old. My next door neighbor, Michelle McMullen, she had that live record, The Waiting for Columbus, and she was turning me on to you when I was that young. So I go way, way back to when that was brand
Uh,
new. So giving you a huge hug. Please stay safe out there and feel the gratitude, my brother.
you too, my friend. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for taking the time to have it with me.
You're very welcome. Aloha, brother.
Aloha.